The Brothers Grimm Fairy Tales. The Three Apprentices. There were once 3 apprentices who had agreed to keep always together while travelling, and always to work in the same town. At one time, however, their masters had no more work to give them, so that at last they were in rags and had nothing to live on. Then one of them said, "What shall we do? We cannot stay here any longer. We will travel once more. And if we do not find any work in the town we go to, we will arrange with the innkeeper there that we are to write and tell him where we are staying, so that we can always have news of each other, and then we will separate." And that seemed best to the others also. They went forth and met on the way a richly dressed man who asked who they were. "We are apprentices looking for work. Up to this time we have kept together, but if we cannot find anything to do, we are going to separate." "There is no need for that," said the man. "If you will do what I tell you, you shall not want for gold or for work. Nay, you shall become great lords and drive in your carriages." One of them said, "If our souls and salvation be not endangered, we will certainly do it." "They will not," replied the man. "I have no claim on you." One of the others had, however, looked at his feet, and when he saw a horse's foot and a man's foot, he did not want to have anything to do with him. The devil, however, said, "Be easy. I have no designs on you, but on another soul, which is half my own already, and whose measure shall but run full." As they were now secure, they consented, and the devil told them what he wanted. The first was to answer, "All 3 of us," to every question. The second was to say, "For money," and the third, "And quite right too." They were always to say this one after the other, but they were not to say one word more, and if they disobeyed this order, all their money would disappear at once, but so long as they observed it, their pockets would always be full. As a beginning, he at once gave them as much as they could carry, and told them to go to such and such an inn when they got to the town. They went to it, and the innkeeper came to meet them, and asked if they wished for anything to eat. The first replied, "All 3 of us." "Yes," said the host, "that is what I mean." The second said, "For money." "Of course," said the host. The third said, "And quite right too." "Certainly it is right," said the host. Good meat and drink were now brought to them, and they were well waited on. After the dinner came the payment, and the innkeeper gave the bill to the one who said, "All 3 of us." The second said, "For money," and the third, "And quite right too." "Indeed it is right," said the host. "All 3 pay, and without money I can give nothing." They, however, paid still more than he had asked. The lodgers, who were looking on, said, "These people must be mad." "Yes, indeed they are," said the host. "They are not very wise." So they stayed some time in the inn, and said nothing else but, "All 3 of us," "For money," and quite right too. But they saw and knew all that was going on. It so happened that a great merchant came with a large sum of money and said, "Sir host, take care of my money for me. Here are 3 crazy apprentices who might steal it from me." The host did as he was asked. As he was carrying the trunk into his room, he felt that it was heavy with gold. Thereupon he gave the 3 apprentices a lodging below, but the merchant came upstairs into a separate apartment. When it was midnight, and the host thought that all were asleep, he came with his wife, and they had an axe and struck the rich merchant dead. And after they had murdered him, they went to bed again. When it was day, there was a great outcry. The merchant lay dead in bed, bathed in blood. All the guests ran at once, but the host said, "The 3 crazy apprentices have done this." The lodgers confirmed it and said, "It can have been no one else." The innkeeper, however, had them called and said to them, "Have you killed the merchant?" "All 3 of us," said the first. "For money," said the second. And the third added, "And quite right, too." "There now, you hear," said the host. "They confess it themselves." They were taken to prison, therefore, and were to be tried. When they saw that things were going so seriously, they were after all afraid, but at night the devil came and said, "Bear it just 1 day longer, and do not play away your luck. Not 1 hair of your head shall be hurt." The next morning they were led to the bar, and the judge said, "Are you the murderers?" "All 3 of us." "Why did you kill the merchant?" "For money." "You wicked wretches, you have no horror of your sins." "And quite right, too." "They have confessed, and are still stubborn," said the judge. "Lead them to death instantly." So they were taken out, and the host had to go with them into the circle. When they were taken hold of by the executioner's men, and were just going to be led up to the scaffold, where the headsman was standing with a naked sword, a coach drawn by 4 blood-red chestnut horses came up suddenly, driving so fast that fire flashed from the stones, and someone made signs from the window with a white handkerchief. Then said the headsman, "It is a pardon coming," and "Pardon, pardon," was called from the carriage also. Then the devil stepped out as a very noble gentleman, beautifully dressed, and said, "You 3 are innocent. You may now speak. Make known what you have seen and heard." Then said the eldest, "We did not kill the merchant. The murderer is standing there in the circle." And he pointed to the innkeeper. "In proof of this, go into his cellar, where many others whom he has killed are still hanging." Then the judge sent the executioner's men thither, and they found it was as the apprentices said. And when they had informed the judge of this, he caused the innkeeper to be led up, and his head was cut off. Then said the devil to the 3, Now I have got the soul which I wanted to have, and you are free, and have money for the rest of your lives." Hans the Hedgehog. There was once a countryman who had money and land in plenty, but how rich soever he was, one thing was still wanting. In his happiness he had no children. Often when he went into the town with the other peasants, they mocked him and asked why he had no children. At last he became angry, and when he got home he said, "I will have a child, even if it be a hedgehog." Then his wife had a child that was a hedgehog in the upper part of his body, and a boy in the lower, and when she saw the child, she was terrified, and said, "See, there thou hast brought ill luck on us." Then said the man, "What can be done now?" "The boy must be christened, but we shall not be able to get a godfather for him." The woman said, "And we cannot call him anything else but Hans the Hedgehog." When he was christened, the parson said, "He cannot go into any ordinary bed because of his spikes." So a little straw was put behind the stove, and Hans the Hedgehog was laid on it. His mother could not suckle him, for he would have pricked her with his quills. So he lay there behind the stove for 8 years, and his father was tired of him and thought, "If he would but die." He did not die, however, but remained lying there. Now it happened that there was a fair in the town, and the peasant was about to go to it, and asked his wife what he should bring back with him for her. "A little meat and a couple of white rolls which are wanted for the house," said she. Then he asked the servant, and she wanted a pair of slippers and some stockings with clocks. At last he said also, "And what wilt thou have, Hans, my hedgehog?" "Dear father," he said, "do bring me bagpipes." When therefore the father came home again, he gave his wife what he had bought for her, meat and white rolls, and then he gave the maid the slippers and the stockings with clocks. And lastly, he went behind the stove and gave Hans the hedgehog the bagpipes. And when Hans the hedgehog had the bagpipes, he said, "Dear father, do go to the forge and get the cock shod, and then I will ride away, and never come back again." On this the father was delighted to think that he was going to get rid of him, and had the cock shod for him, and when it was done, Hans the hedgehog got on it, and rode away, but took swine and asses with him which he intended to keep in the forest. When they got there, he made the cock fly on to a high tree with him, and there he sat for many a long year, and watched his asses and swine until the herd was quite large, and his father knew nothing about him. While he was sitting in the tree, however, he played his bagpipes and made music, which was very beautiful. Once a king came travelling by who had lost his way and heard the music. He was astonished at it and sent his servant forth to look all round and see from whence this music came. He spied about, but saw nothing but a little animal sitting up aloft on the tree, which looked like a cock with a hedgehog on it, which made this music. Then the king told the servant he was to ask why he sat there, and if he knew the road which led to his kingdom. So Hans the hedgehog descended from the tree, and said he would show the way if the king would write a bond and promise him whatever he first met in the royal courtyard as soon as he arrived at home. Then the king thought, "I can easily do that. Hans the hedgehog understands nothing, and I can write what I like." So the king took pen and ink and wrote something, and when he had done it, Hans the hedgehog showed him the way, and he got safely home. But his daughter, when she saw him from afar, was so overjoyed that she ran to meet him and kissed him. Then he remembered Hans the hedgehog and told her what had happened, and that he had been forced to promise whatsoever first met him when he got home to a very strange animal which sat on a cock as if it were a horse and made beautiful music, but that instead of writing that he should have what he wanted, he had written that he should not have it. Thereupon the princess was glad, and said he had done well, for she never would have gone away with the hedgehog. Hans the hedgehog, however, looked after his asses and pigs, and was always merry, and sat on the tree and played his bagpipes. Now it came to pass that another king came journeying by with his attendants and runners, and he also had lost his way and did not know how to get home again, because the forest was so large. He likewise heard the beautiful music from a distance, and asked his runner what that could be, and told him to go and see. Then the runner went under the tree and saw the cock sitting at the top of it, and Hans the hedgehog on the cock. The runner asked him what he was about up there. "I am keeping my asses and my pigs, but what is your desire?" The messenger said that they had lost their way, and could not get back into their own kingdom, and asked if he would not show them the way. Then Hans the hedgehog got down the tree with the cock, and told the aged king that he would show him the way, if he would give him for his own whatsoever first met him in front of his royal palace. The king said yes. and wrote a promise to Hans the Hedgehog that he should have this. That done, Hans rode on before him on the cock and pointed out the way, and the king reached his kingdom again in safety. When he got to the courtyard, there were great rejoicings. Now he had an only daughter, who was very beautiful. She ran to meet him, threw her arms round his neck, and was delighted to have her old father back again. She asked him where in the world he had been so long. So he told her how he had lost his way, and had very nearly not come back at all, but that as he was travelling through a great forest, a creature, half hedgehog, half man, who was sitting astride a cock in a high tree, and making music, had shown him the way and helped him to get out, but that in return he had promised him whatsoever first met him in the royal courtyard, and how that was she herself, which made him unhappy now. But on this she promised that for love of her father she would willingly go with this Hans if he came. Hans the Hedgehog, however, took care of his pigs, and the pigs multiplied until they became so many in number that the whole forest was filled with them. Then Hans the Hedgehog resolved not to live in the forest any longer, and sent word to his father to have every sty in the village emptied, for he was coming with such a great herd that all might kill who wished to do so. When his father heard that, he was troubled, for he thought Hans the Hedgehog had died long ago. Hans the Hedgehog, however, seated himself on the cock, and drove the pigs before him into the village, and ordered the slaughter to begin. Ha ha! But there was a killing and a chopping that might have been heard 2 miles off. After this, Hans the Hedgehog said, "Father, let me have the cock shod once more at the forge, and then I will ride away, and never come back as long as I live." Then the father had the cock shod once more, and was pleased that Hans the Hedgehog would never return again. Hans the Hedgehog rode away to the first kingdom. There the king had commanded that whosoever came, mounted on a cock and had bagpipes with him, should be shot at, cut down, or stabbed by everyone, so that he might not enter the palace. When therefore Hans the Hedgehog came riding thither, they all pressed forward against him with their pikes, but he spurred the cock, and it flew up over the gate in front of the king's window, and lighted there, and Hans cried that the king must give him what he had promised, or he would take both his life and his daughter's. Then the king began to speak his daughter fair, and to beg her to go away with Hans in order to save her own life and her father's. So she dressed herself in white, and her father gave her a carriage with 6 horses and magnificent attendants, together with gold and possessions. She seated herself in the carriage and placed Hans the Hedgehog beside her with the cock and the bagpipes, and then they took leave and drove away. And the king thought he should never see her again. He was, however, deceived in his expectation, for when they were at a short distance from the town, Hans the Hedgehog took her pretty clothes off, and pierced her with his hedgehog skin until she bled all over. "That is the reward of your falseness," said he. "Go your way, I will not have you." And on that he chased her home again, and she was disgraced for the rest of her life. Hans the Hedgehog, however, rode on further on the cock with his bagpipes to the dominions of the second king to whom he had shown the way. This one, however, had arranged that if anyone resembling Hans the Hedgehog should come, they were to present arms, give him safe conduct, cry long life to him, and lead him to the royal palace. But when the king's daughter saw him, she was terrified, for he looked quite too strange. She remembered, however, that she could not change her mind, for she had given her promise to her father. So Hans the Hedgehog was welcomed by her and married to her, and had to go with her to the royal table, and she seated herself by his side, and they ate and drank. When the evening came and they wanted to go to sleep, she was afraid of his quills, but he told her she was not to fear, for no harm would befall her. And he told the old king that he was to appoint 4 men to watch by the door of the chamber and light a great fire, and when he entered the room and was about to get into bed, he would creep out of his hedgehog skin and leave it lying there by the bedside, and that the men were to run nimbly to it, throw it in the fire, and stay by it until it was consumed. When the clock struck 11, he went into the chamber, stripped off the hedgehog skin, and left it lying by the bed. Then came the men and fetched it swiftly and threw it in the fire, and when the fire had consumed it, he was delivered, and lay there in bed in human form, but he was coal-black, as if he had been burnt. The king sent for his physician, who washed him with precious salves, and anointed him, and he became white, and was a handsome young man. When the king's daughter saw that she was glad, and the next morning they arose joyfully, ate and drank, and then the marriage was properly solemnized, and Hans the Hedgehog received the kingdom from the aged king. When several years had passed, he went with his wife to his father, and said that he was his son. The father, however, declared he had no son, he had never had but one, and he had been born like a hedgehog with spikes, and had gone forth into the world. Then Hans made himself known, and the old father rejoiced and went with him to his kingdom. Simeli Mountain. There were once 2 brothers, the one rich, the other poor. The rich one, however, gave nothing to the poor one, and he gained a scanty living by trading in corn, and often did so badly that he had no bread for his wife and children. Once when he was wheeling a barrow through the forest, he saw, on one side of him, a great, bare, naked-looking mountain. And as he had never seen it before, he stood still and stared at it with amazement. While he was thus standing, he saw 12 great, wild men coming towards him, and as he believed they were robbers, he pushed his barrow into the thicket, climbed up a tree, and waited to see what would happen. The 12 men, however, went to the mountain and cried, "Simeli Mountain, Simeli Mountain, open!" And immediately the barren mountain opened down the middle, and the 12 went into it, and as soon as they were within, it shut. After a short time, however, it opened again, and the men came forth, carrying heavy sacks on their shoulders, and when they were all once more in the daylight, they said, "Simeli Mountain, shut thyself." Then the mountain closed together, and there was no longer any entrance to be seen to it, and the 12 went away. When they were quite out of sight, the poor man got down from the tree and was curious to know what really was secretly hidden in the mountain. So he went up to it and said, "Simeli Mountain, open." And the mountain opened to him also. He went inside, and the whole mountain was a cavern full of silver and gold, and behind lay great piles of pearls and sparkling jewels, heaped up like corn. The poor man hardly knew what to do, and whether he might take any of these treasures for himself or not, but at last he filled his pockets with gold, but he left the pearls and precious stones where they were. When he came out again, he also said, "Simeli Mountain, "Shut thyself." And the mountain closed itself, and he went home with his barrow. And now he had no more cause for anxiety, but could buy bread for his wife and children with his gold, and wine into the bargain. He lived joyously and uprightly, gave help to the poor, and did good to everyone. When, however, the money came to an end, he went to his brother, borrowed a measure that held a bushel, and brought himself some more, but did not touch any of the most valuable things. When for the third time he wanted to fetch something, he again borrowed the measure of his brother. The rich man had, however, long been envious of his brother's possessions, and of the handsome way of living which he had set on foot, and could not understand from whence the riches came, and what his brother wanted with the measure. Then he thought of a cunning trick, and covered the bottom of the measure with pitch, and when he got the measure back, a piece of money was sticking in it. He at once went to his brother and asked him, "What hast thou been measuring in the bushel measure?" "Corn and barley," said the other. Then he showed him the piece of money, and threatened that if he did not tell the truth, he would accuse him before a court of justice. The poor man then told him everything, just as it happened. The rich man, however, ordered his carriage to be made ready, and drove away, resolved to use the opportunity better than his brother had done, and to bring back with him quite different treasures. When he came to the mountain, he cried, Simeli Mountain, open." The mountain opened, and he went inside it. There lay the treasures all before him, and for a long time he did not know which to clutch at first. At length he loaded himself with as many precious stones as he could carry. He wished to carry his burden outside, but as his heart and soul were entirely full of the treasures, he had forgotten the name of the mountain, and cried, Simeli Mountain, open." That, however, was not the right name, and the mountain never stirred, but remained shut. Then he was alarmed, but the longer he thought about it, the more his thoughts confused themselves, and his treasures were no more of any use to him. In the evening the mountain opened, and the 12 robbers came in, and when they saw him, they laughed and cried out, "Bird, have we caught thee at last? Didst thou think we had never noticed that thou hadst been in here twice? We could not catch thee then, this third time thou shalt not get out again." Then he cried, "It was not I, it was my brother." But let him beg for his life and say what he would, they cut his head off. The 3 Brothers. There was once a man who had 3 sons, and nothing else in the world but the house in which he lived. Now each of the sons wished to have the house after his father's death, but the father loved them all alike and did not know what to do. He did not wish to sell the house, because it had belonged to his forefathers, else he might have divided the money amongst them. At last a plan came into his head, and he said to his sons, "Go into the world and try each of you to learn a trade, and, when you all come back, he who makes the best masterpiece shall have the house." The sons were well content with this, and the eldest determined to be a blacksmith, the second a barber, and the third a fencing master. They fixed a time when they should all come home again, and then each went his way. It chanced that they all found skilful masters, who taught them their trades well. The blacksmith had to shoe the king's horses, and he thought to himself, "The house is mine without doubt." The barber only shaved great people, and he too already looked upon the house as his own. The fencing master got many a blow, but he only bit his lip, and let nothing vex him. For, said he to himself, if you are afraid of a blow, you'll never win the house. When the appointed time had gone by, the three brothers came back home to their father, but they did not know how to find the best opportunity for showing their skill, so they sat down and consulted together. As they were sitting thus, all at once a hare came running across the field. "Ah, just in time," said the barber. So he took his basin and soap and lathered away until the hare came up. Then he soaped and shaved off the hare's whiskers whilst he was running at the top of his speed, and did not even cut his skin or injure a hair on his body. "Well done," said the old man. "Your brothers will have to exert themselves wonderfully, or the house will be yours." Soon after, up came a nobleman in his coach, dashing along at full speed. "Now you shall see what I can do, father," said the blacksmith. So away he ran after the coach, took all 4 shoes off the feet of one of the horses whilst he was galloping, and put him on 4 new shoes without stopping him. "You are a fine fellow, and as clever as your brother," said his father. "I do not know to which I ought to give the house." Then the third son said, "Father, let me have my turn, if you please." And as it was beginning to rain, he drew his sword and flourished it backwards and forwards above his head, so fast that not a drop fell upon him. It rained still harder and harder, till at last it came down in torrents, but he only flourished his sword faster and faster, and remained as dry as if he were sitting in a house. When his father saw this, he was amazed, and said, "This is the masterpiece, the house is yours." His brothers were satisfied with this, as was agreed beforehand, and, as they loved one another very much, they all 3 stayed together in the house, followed their trades, and, as they had learnt them so well and were so clever, they earned a great deal of money. Thus they lived together happily until they grew old, and at last, when one of them fell sick and died, the 2 others grieved so sorely about it that they also fell ill, and soon after died. And because they had been so clever and had loved one another so much, they were all laid in the same grave.